The views presented in this documentary are solely the personal opinions and views of the creators and directors of this film. We assume no liability for your actions based on the content of this video. We do not promote the use of any substances and assume no responsibility for actions taken. Please do your own research for legality in your area. Always consult a physician before ingesting any substance or making any changes to your current health regime.
The higher you go, the smaller it all becomes, as you begin to see the essence of others and of yourself, to experience the interconnectedness of all life. As you contemplate your reality, through your eye, the window of your perception, your world gathers its elemental senses to mirror your awareness. The truth of creation gazes back at you.
Most of us think that we behave for reasons that we understand, but most of our behavior is actually governed by unconscious forces. Now, the psychedelic plants can manifest what's in the unconscious mind. What you will bring out of you will save you.
People's minds are opening, and we are seeing this rapid evolution in consciousness that's accelerating at an exponential rate.
So you're about to watch a documentary about plant medicines and psychedelics. Just a few short years ago, my entire perspective towards them was shattered and then reconstructed in a whole new light. And my intention of making this film is to share the other side of the story with you. So where does the journey begin? You know, life has its ups and downs, and at a period in my life where I felt totally lost, unsure, I started searching for answers. And where does one search for answers? The Bible, spiritual texts, family and friends, elders, psychiatrists maybe, or of course the trusted Google. That's where I usually like to go. So one night I was doing a YouTube, I was watching something like Alan Watts, and in the comments section, someone referenced the name Terence McKenna, and it was as if that actual comment was directed directly at me. I could have been the only one who saw it. And what it said was, if you really want to have your mind blown, you have to, look up Terence McKenna. So I quickly entered his name into a Google search and hit enter. And I didn't realize at the time, but that search alone right there changed my entire life. Within a couple hours, I had ordered all of his books. He spoke in such a way that just sort of caught my attention in a way that had never been before. So within the span of a couple of weeks, I'd made up my mind. I would be traveling solo to South America to partake in my first ever ayahuasca experience. Little did I know how profound the experience would be. When I went there, I was envisioning addicts, maybe some trippers, maybe some punk metal type enthusiasts, a lot of hippie type people, but when I got there, it was quite the contrary. There were doctors, lawyers, professionals, artists, authors, athletes. It was a mix of everybody. And I realized that everyone was there for a different reason. I was there because I was a seeker. Other people were going through trauma. And it was really interesting to see that, wow, there's so much depth to this one thing that ties us all in common. So now I needed answers. I had so many questions, and that's what really spawned me to make this documentary. More than anything, I really wanted to know if we as human beings were meant to have altered states of consciousness. So after I sat there with all these incredible people, meeting them for the first time, with all these questions racing through my mind, the main one that stuck out was, had we been psyched out? For many years, plant medicine and psychedelics have been portrayed in a negative way. Is it just due to lack of understanding, fear of the unknown, or something else entirely?
From the very beginnings of unrecorded time, men have reached for substances in the world around them that would alter, extend, and materially change their perception of reality. The reasons? Loneliness and fear, boredom, and a desire for the new and the unknown. Some have used these drugs to journey into the uncharted tunnels of the mind in search of medical and scientific truth. Others look behind the curtain just for kicks.
This emergence into consciousness was triggered by our ancestors' encounters with visionary plants and the beginning of shamanism. If you analyze the cave art, there's not time to go into the details here, but there are so many details that make it clear that this was an art of altered states of consciousness, of visions. That plants like the Amanita muscaria mushroom or psilocybin mushrooms appear to have been directly connected with this sudden and radical change.
When we originally created the historical timeline for this documentary, we realized it could be a documentary in itself. We condensed it to a very simplified version. It was difficult to pinpoint the origin of many of the psychedelics and plant medicines in this movie. In this timeline, the farther back we go into history, the more guesswork and theorizing we have to do. Whereas we get closer to modern day, more evidence is readily available. Please keep in mind that these dates are based on what is currently known, and new discoveries can potentially push these dates back indefinitely. Take for example the iboga plant from Africa. Traditions say it has been used since the beginning of time and actually represents the tree of knowledge of good and evil. I find this interesting because they are not the only ones who have made this suggestion. The Egyptians' representation of the tree of life was the acacia tree, known to have contained DMT, one of the most powerful psychedelics known to man. And interestingly enough, many scholars believe that this same bush, the acacia, was also the burning bush in the story of Moses, when he had visions of God that came to him on the mountain. In the Adam and Eve story, could the forbidden fruit have been the Amanita muscaria mushroom? Terence McKenna was a supporter of this theory. The mushroom is the fleshy, spore-bearing, fruiting body of a fungus. Throughout the Bible, there are many passages and references that can easily be interpreted as psychedelic in suggestion simply by reanalyzing a few simple words. Fruiting body of a fungus? Forbidden fruit? Another theory that Terence McKenna postulated was that the food of the gods, the psychedelic plants, were actually what caused man to evolve into the current human beings we are today. Over a 2 million year period, our brains doubled in size. Current theories suggest that we evolved through a change in our diet, which was primarily due to meat consumption. However, there are many carnivorous animals that have not evolved, and there are primates like the chimpanzee that do eat their fair share of meat and have yet to evolve as well. During that 2 million year span, various droughts and changing climates caused the forests to recede, and many of the lower primates ventured out of the jungles onto the grassy plains in search for food. While searching for bugs under cow dung patties, they would find magic mushrooms, the consumption of which would lead to cognitive advances within these primates and potentially lead to an evolution into the current Homo sapiens we are today. This is what has been come to know the stoned ape theory. Where we start to see a little more concrete evidence is in the various cave paintings found throughout the world. Some dating back as far as 40,000 years have shown various references to the possibilities of psychedelic or entheogen use. Things such as geometric waves coming from the minds of the various indigenous peoples, and even things as clear as mushroom heads were found painted on the walls of these caves. Around 15,000 BC, we find evidence of cannabis cultivation, which throughout history after this is pretty much found throughout the world. We also start to see psychedelic mushroom cultivation at this time. Around 4000 BC, evidence of Siberian shamanism who used the Amanita muscaria mushroom in their rituals was discovered. In 3000 BC in Egypt, we see references to the blue lotus flower, a known psychedelic plant, as well as a plant called mandrake, also known for its psychedelic properties. At the same time, the first evidence is found of the use of ayahuasca in the Amazon, as well as peyote and other mind-altering cacti throughout the rest of the Americas. By this time, cannabis cultivation is in full swing in China, used as both fiber and medicine. Just after 2000 BC, the mysteries became wildly popular in Greece, and after 4 days of fasting, a substance called kykeon was ingested that led to profound visions and deep understandings of life and death. Around the same time, roughly 1500 BC, the Rig Vedas are written in India, talking about a plant god named Soma. A lot of the knowledge around Soma had been lost throughout history. However, it is believed to be a psychedelic drink of some kind known for increasing awareness, imparting mystical experiences, poetic inspiration, and even immortality. Some say that Soma may have been made from psychedelic mushrooms and be the reason why the cow is considered so holy, as the mushrooms grow directly out of the cow dung. Around 1000 BC, stones carved into mushrooms are found all over the Mesoamerican cultures, including the Olmecs, Incas, and Mayans. The Aztecs called these mushrooms Tionanactecol. which literally means flesh of the gods. Around the 4th century AD is where things get bad for psychedelics. Christianity became the legal religion of the Roman state, and all other beliefs were condemned. Over the next 1,000 years or so, we witnessed the Dark Ages and the Crusades, where numerous people were killed for not being Christian and most of their traditions destroyed. This continued right through the 1500s, where European colonizers destroyed the Aztec Empire and many other North American indigenous traditions and people. It took a while for psychedelics to resurface, simply due to the stigma surrounding them. Most people who use them were considered warlocks, witches, or crazy. In 1938, LSD was discovered, and by the 1950s was being studied heavily by many organizations, including the CIA. A huge turning point was in 1957 when Life magazine published an article on psychedelics and instantaneously boosted their popularity. The 60s ushered in a new age of widespread psychedelic use before the American government shuts them down totally in the 70s and declares the war on drugs. All scientific studies are put on a standstill. In the last few decades, it seems that psychedelics are re-emerging out of the shadows, and we are witnessing a psychedelic renaissance. Many people are starting to see the true nature of these plant medicines and have been drawn towards them for one reason or another. Does it make sense that something that has been used throughout history be vilified and criminalized as they have been today?
In the 60s, they really were used in dysfunctional ways and created a lot of suffering. And that covered their possible therapeutic use. It's very much like the sorcerer's apprentice phenomenon. You get something very powerful, but whether it's beneficial or whether it's harmful depends on who's using it and for what purpose. So in the 60s, they were very often used in negative ways because they wasn't under the guidance of experience and wisdom.
Well, before I took psychedelics ever, we have to go pretty far back into the 60s because, my brother and I were really children of the 60s, and we were influenced by the social movements around, especially LSD. LSD was the, the catalytic psychedelic of that era, much as ayahuasca is now. So we knew that these things were there, but very few people had access to them. After Watson's articles about the magic mushroom cults in Mexico came out, that actually predated the 60s. His article in Life magazine in 1957 is, I think, one of the big events that really brought psychedelics into mass awareness. Life magazine was on the kitchen table of every house in America practically. And everybody was pushing, everybody was exploring about what is this new phenomenon of psychedelics and what does this really mean. They hadn't been around long enough for people to really get a negative impression yet, even though the government and the media was doing their best to kind of show it in a negative light. And eventually it was, but at the time there was just a lot of curiosity about it. The whole idea of consciousness expansion was even kind of a new cultural meme at that time. And so they weren't really stigmatized in the mid-60s. They were catalysts for change, and institutions like governments and educational institutions and religion don't like change. The women's movement, the environmental movement, the anti-war movement, all of these things were directly influenced by psychedelics. And at critical junctures in human history, psychedelics have always been part of it and continue to be part of it.
I don't think they're for everybody. I think what happened in the 60s is that too many people started doing them without any respect for them, without any knowledge, without any context, and the society wasn't ready for so many people. The society was still very adolescent.
What I saw was this massive crackdown that not only criminalized psychedelics, but stopped all the scientific research all over the world.
join me here. Won't you be seated, please, ladies and gentlemen? Come on, Dr. Jaffe. Mr. Crow, Mr. Earl. Fine. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to summarize for you the meeting that I have just had with bipartisan leaders. America's public enemy number one in the United States is drug abuse.
What exactly are these illegal substances called psychedelics anyways? Psychedelic defined is something that causes a hallucinogenic effect or causes an expansion of consciousness. Some of the psychedelics you may be familiar with are called LSD, ayahuasca, psilocybin like magic mushrooms, DMT, dimethyltryptamine, mescaline, peyote, San Pedro cactus, and the list goes on. Even sometimes MDMA will be put in the same category. All of these and many more that I've just listed are classified as Schedule I narcotics.
Sometimes in these troubled days, the very thoughtlessness of youth has led to a living nightmare. Addiction to drugs, too often acquired with tragic carelessness, may take control of a life and force actions not dreamed of before. To these addicts, life's only work is to find money for drugs. In their desperation, no means is too foul.
The most restrictive drug classification is a Schedule I substance. A Schedule I substance is no recognized medical use, potentially dangerous, highly subject to abuse or addiction. In other words, no redeeming value at all.
Okay, a little bit of health news for you. A single dose of psychedelic magic mushrooms can make people with severe anxiety and depression feel better for months. Doctors with New York University and Johns Hopkins University performed independent tests with the illegal ingredient psilocybin. They found it helped cancer patients relax and ease anxiety and depression in 80% of the patients studied. In some cases, the effects lasted for months.
There's a great arbitrariness in the definition of what should be legal and what isn't. So the example I often give is that of opiate use versus cigarette smoking. Cigarette smoking is far more harmful in terms of its health impact and its destruction of human life. In other words, give me 100 people who smoke and 100 people who use opiates. As long as they don't overdose, those 100 with the opiates will be far healthier 30 years later than if they smoke cigarettes. And many more of them will be alive. So which is the more harmful substance? No question.
It's okay to go and get drunk because that gives you a little break, and then next day, despite your hangover, you can get back to your job, you know? Or it's okay for Big Pharma to prescribe all kinds of consciousness-altering drugs to psychological issues such as depression or hyperactivity disorder. These accepted consciousness-altering substances like alcohol, like the pharmaceutical drugs, they actually in a way underpin the alert problem-solving state of consciousness, but psychedelics don't. Psychedelics lead to questioning about everything, about ourselves, about our place in the world, and about social structures. And this is something that the dominated powers in our society don't want to see happen.
So I was trying to find out how many people were dying of overdose and on these psychedelic substances, and it was very hard to find. The numbers were so low, it was hard to even find data on them. You know, in this chart here, you'll see the amount of deaths caused by different sorts of substances, and psychedelics were not even big enough to get a blip on the list. It didn't even make it on the radar. The number of studies that are now out there that are showing the benefits for, you know, emotional, physical, mental, are growing in number every single month. And it's very, very promising to see where the future might go with this stuff. So I was curious to see what were the effects, not only on the user, but also on society. And it just so happened that a guy by the name of Professor David J. Nutt had already done this exact study. And he ranked all the narcotics and substances on a scale of 0 to 100, and basically 100 being the worst and 0 being the best. The one that scored the highest was alcohol at a number of 72, and things like LSD scored 7, MDMA scored only a 9, and psilocybin was a 6, showing that the relative, I guess, dangers to people and the people around them was relatively low. Most people aren't aware, but in 2001, Portugal decriminalized all drugs. Their drug-induced mortality rate went from one of the highest to one of the lowest in the world. And in addition to that, an amazing side effect was that their overall crime rate reduced significantly as well.
More and more people are saying this war on drugs is fundamentally wasteful, racist, is focused on building prisons instead of building schools, And so I think there will be a general switch in society towards public health rather than criminal justice approaches to the problems of drug abuse, because legalization will not solve all the problems of drug abuse. It just solves the problems of the criminalization and prohibition, just the same way that the legalization of alcohol and ending alcohol prohibition hasn't solved all alcohol problems.
But ibogaine, which is another substance that is really dramatically and powerfully useful in the treatment of opiate addiction. In fact, it's quite astonishing what it can do. But somebody did approach the pharmaceutical companies, so I heard, with ibogaine, and they were not interested, because why would they be interested in a substance that a person would only use once or twice, and then addiction is finished? They'd much rather make methadone or other substances that you have to take daily for the rest of your life.
In fact, we so freaked out the DEA, because they had no idea that MDMA was used therapeutically. Only ecstasy was all that they were aware of. So when this group of doctors from Harvard Medical School and elsewhere, were on this petition that I filed with DEA, we took them totally by surprise. And then when the hearings started happening and we were getting this major media with all these religious people talking, they just didn't know what to do, and they panicked. And so they put MDMA, they criminalized it in an emergency basis while the hearings were still going on. And eventually we won the hearing. The DEA administrative law judge said that MDMA should stay legal for therapy. It should be illegal for recreational use, but legal for therapy.
So there's definitely a prohibition that has been going on with hallucinogens, any type of substance that alters the mood or alters the mind. And these prohibitions, as much as they may be looked at as the government or the man enforcing rules upon us, and whether they may be arbitrary or not, there's a lot of talk about keeping hallucinogens out of the hands of people, making them illegal, passing legislation to make it very difficult and punitive when you get caught with hallucinogens. A culture like that, of course you're going to find people saying that they don't want us thinking and using the they as whatever forces they may be. That's what government is all about. It's about that gray area and finding the balance between protecting the people and not cracking down too hard and imposing rule on everything in life.
Now, I'm no science major, but I found it quite interesting that the molecular structure of most of the psychedelic compounds was very similar to the endogenous neurotransmitters, things like serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine. The other thing that's quite interesting is that DMT, the mother of all psychedelics, dimethyltryptamine, is found within our own brains, in our pineal gland. They say it's released during dreams, potentially at birth and death, and even in near-death experiences. Now, the psychedelic experience can be joyous and ecstatic, and it can also be scary and challenging. But every experience is different for every single person, and even every experience that you have within yourself can be different every single time.
Do they make possible creative achievement and a more valid and intense perception? Or do they merely substitute an unreal fantasy world for the sometimes harsh facts of reality?
Oh yes, I think that I experience things much more intensely now.
I felt this warm fire shoot up the right side of my body, and it just filled me with this warmth. And then I look off in the distance, and emerging out of the darkness are these purple and green beams that look like aurora borealis, they look like northern lights, and they start waving towards me. And so these beams of light then wrap themselves around me, and I look down, and it's just like I'm covered in northern lights, which is pretty cool. And the beams then roll me over onto my left side into the fetal position, and I'm lying there feeling the most comforting, deep, powerful maternal presence that I've ever encountered. And it was so like nurturing and comforting, and no discredit to my own mother, but this was the greatest mother in all the universe, and I knew that. And so I'm about to close my eyes, and then boom, I hear this so-wah, wah, wah, and it's the shaman or Mohanes singing what they call Icaros. They claim that it's a song that they channel from higher powers, and it's not really of their own creation. And they use it to guide those who drink the ayahuasca through their experience. And as he's singing it, these orange and blue shapes are emanating from his mouth and just like expanding across the room and just filling my entire perceptual field like this gigantic cloud. At that point, these three beings float into the right side of my perceptual field, and I called them humanoids. They were about 2.5 feet tall, and all three of them were just expressing love, and it was all telepathic. Like they were just like imparting it to me and like filling me with it. They start showing me all these lessons about love and just loving all things. And for example, love being that it's allowing all beings to make their own choices. As I started encountering more and more of these spirits, I recognized that they were infinite. And it was like peering into a night sky and you see stars, and then you notice that there are stars beyond the stars. So it was like there were spirits beyond the spirits, and I was navigating this realm in my consciousness and like beyond my consciousness too. It was separate from me, and it was just like I was swimming in a sea of spirits. In every direction I looked, it was infinite.
So psychedelics are really interesting because they take you within and without in a way that you don't normally experience. It's kind of a mystery, actually, because just from the very basis that anytime you take a psychedelic, you really have no idea where you're going to end up, which is why it's so important that if you're going to do it, that you do it in a really good environment and among people that have a lot of love and respect for you. And so where do you go? I mean, you go into everything. You go into yourself and into the environment around you more so than you normally experience. And so it's really quite a remarkable experience from that perspective. It's always going to be different, but it's always going to be unique. But of course, the biggest thing is really just to be safe about it. No matter what, the environment is just as important as what substance you end up taking. And at the end of the day, it really is about a truly in-depth exploration of the self.
Yeah, man, that's the purpose of ayahuasca, to go into the unconscious. That the person who gets scared just means they have fear. It's not that ayahuasca causes fear, it's that they already have fear that ayahuasca's taken them into. So what they, describe as a bad trip is their inability to integrate what ayahuasca is showing them, which is their unconscious, which is their fear, which is their shadow. So if they've come to ayahuasca to feel light and love, you're not ready to drink ayahuasca, because that's not what life is. Life is certainly at the part of life. There is light and love, but that's not all there is. There's also shadow, and the shadow is our teacher. So if you come to ayahuasca, you have to be absolutely committed to learning from your shadow. Otherwise, you are going to have challenging experiences. That's the purpose of ayahuasca. That's the way the indigenous people have used ayahuasca. It's a tool to become more conscious. So that fear comes up, now you're conscious of the fear. That's not a bad thing, that's a great thing. But you have to be ready to work with it and integrate it.
I was actually in Boracay in the Philippines, and a girl from Brooklyn who was a shaman we were friends, and she knew my problem. She actually tried to work on me before. And she saw on Facebook I was there, and she was going to a retreat in Cebu, and she stopped in on me. And she said, hey, there's this guy that I knew who was just like you. As a matter of fact, he was even worse. And I found that hard to believe. But she said he was even worse, and he went to do this plant medicine, and did the plant medicine one time, and he changed his life. And I thought, you know what, I tried everything else. I'm scared shit of doing plant medicine. I'm scared to death of, some kind of crazy trip or something like this. I said, I'm scared to do it, but I'm done. It's my last chance. The way this medicine works is a little bit different. He gives you the medicine and then gives you a blindfold, and he taps you on the tip of the head and tells you says, tell me when you see my finger. And I'm about to say, well, I can't see your finger because I have this blindfold. I said, I see your finger. All of a sudden I saw the dude's finger, and I'm like, I have a blindfold on. I know I have a blindfold on. I'm not in Kansas anymore. I didn't even really believe in God. I was in church every day in my life, but I didn't really believe in God. God for me was a side bet in case shit went wrong. Like if it was, I genuflected here and there and said some prayers just in case it was real. I had no feeling towards it. So all of a sudden, I'm looking and I see this guy's hand and he says, look at the ceiling. I look at the ceiling. He goes, look, and I see the ceiling. Look through the ceiling, and I looked through the ceiling. And he said, do you see stars? I said, yeah. He said, jump to a star. And I jumped to a star and I was flying. And I'm like, what the hell is going on here? He said, look to your left. Do you see the moon? I looked to my left. He said, I see the moon. He said, go to it. So I went to the moon and I couldn't slow down. And I dove into the moon and my feet were sticking out of the moon. And here's the truth. The whole time you're talking to the shaman, telling him what's going on, and he's telling you what to do. Wow. So you have these things on, this experience has happened to you, like, I guess like virtual reality. This is happening to you, yet I'm hearing him and communicating with him. Wow. So I'm in both places, right? So he says, I said, what's my first, because you give him 10 questions, he writes them down. I said, why am I so effed up? That was my first question. All of a sudden my soul turns into the 3-year-old me. He's holding my hand. I'm walking a baby into a house. And as soon as I get around the house, I can smell food. It smells like turkey. There's Bing Crosby music playing. There's snow outside. It's like around Christmas. There's a Christmas tree. I smell pine needles and shit, right? And I get the immediate feeling that shit's not right. And so I go with the kid and I see a stain that I made. I would never remember making a stain at 2 years old. But when I saw it with my kid, with me, I go, holy shit, I did that. I remember doing that. And making the stain, right? On the wall, it was a cranberry juice stain on a wall. And so we walk in to the thing and we're going to this coat closet and he's telling me where to go, like pulling me. And as soon as I see the coat closet, I know things are going to get probably worse at this point. I open the coat closet and my grandfather has his penis all over me as a kid, the 3-year-old boy. And so I'm like, oh, well, to me, that explained a lot of things. I'm like, well, that's why I'm so crazy. That's why I can't connect with women. That's why I can't connect with dudes. I can't really connect. It's weird. It's like, you know, I was so shut down, right? So it was the best night of my life. So the thing is this, so I found out what was wrong with me. And I was just in such awe the whole time. So like it was a crazy, crazy thing. And then the next day, I no longer wanted to quit smoking cigarettes. I could drink. I was drinking 10 drinks a day. I could drink 2 drinks and not drink another drink. I wanted to start eating better. I wanted to do these things, and not that I was trying to do them. I just wanted to do them. Something in me changed.
The human brain, after all, is made for thinking, not fumigating. It's hardly a tinker toy for experimenting with drugs. This has been a public service message of the American Medical Association and your local station.
It's extremely hard to speak about the experiences of psychedelics or plant medicines to somebody who has no experience. The best way to describe an ayahuasca experience or a mushroom experience is to take the tea or to take the mushroom, right? Because so much of the experience is inexpressible, is ineffable, which is why we spend so much time coming up with language for these things.
Although it's very difficult to describe what a psychedelic vision looks like, there have been artists who have been able to recreate somewhat accurate depictions of these visions. I also found it quite interesting when I heard about a guy by the name of Sean Thornton. Sean was an artist who had pineal gland cancer. That's the gland responsible for the production of DMT within our brains.
Now, these mental effects to the confirmed LSD user, to the evangelist, if you will, are felt to be religious and beautiful and godlike, perhaps because they expect them to be. Realistically speaking, they are nothing more nor less than a period of insanity.
So where does spirituality come into all this? Can you have a spiritual experience through a psychedelic? The question was of such great curiosity that Harvard actually conducted 2 experiments. One of them called the Good Friday experiment. The other was done by someone named Walter Pankey.
They concluded that yes, you could have a spiritual experience through the use of psychedelics. And not only that, it also lasted a very long time after the experiment had taken place.
I read a book by Robert Mueller, and he was the Assistant Secretary General of the United Nations. And the book was called New Genesis, Shaping a Global Spirituality. So it was a brilliant book, and I wrote him a letter, and I said, I really was moved by your book, but you don't have a word about psychedelics. And so I wrote to Robert Mueller, and I told him about the Good Friday experiment. And I said, right now, MDMA is a psychedelic drug. I'd learned about it in '82. In '84, it was still legal. And I said, it's still legal. And would you be willing to help open the door to psychedelic research? A college undergraduate gets this letter from the Assistant Secretary General of the United Nations, and he said, you understood me perfectly, and I do think that psychedelics could be helpful, and I will help you to try to bring back psychedelic research, and here's a bunch of people who are in the spiritual traditions that I'd be interested to know what they have to say. And so I kind of read between the lines, and I heard him say, mail them MDMA. So this was Brother David Steindl-Rast, who's a Roman Catholic monk, Vanya Palmers, who was head of the Zen community in Switzerland, Wayne Teasdale, a Catholic monk, Rabbi Zalman Schachter, who was an Orthodox rabbi. So MDMA was legal, so I mailed them MDMA. And one of them, Brother David Steindl-Rast, took it in the monastery. Other people took it in their religious practices, and then they wrote back to Robert Mueller that, yeah, MDMA really can be helpful. So that kind of confirmed for me this theory of social change, that if people can have experiences of spirituality and mysticism, whether by psychedelics or not, other means are fine too, that is a strategy towards peace. And that reaffirmed my commitment to bringing psychedelics back and trying to mainstream them into Western culture.
People are not finding meaningful experience within our culture, meaningful spiritual experience within our culture. People have a longing for that.
There are many people from traditional faiths, whether they be, let's say, of the monotheistic variety, the Abrahamic traditions of Judaism, Christianity, Islam, who have participated in ayahuasca ceremonies and have found that it has deepened their faith, right? Because it has given them a direct personal experience of who knows what, the Virgin Mary, Jesus, different saints, or just a feeling of being embraced by the Holy Spirit. In fact, some people have said that all major religious traditions have at their root a psychedelic beginning.
God created the brain in such a way to be able to communicate with us. And this goes a long way in explaining, why there is, for example, DMT in the brain, that it helps mediate the visions which God uses to communicate certain information to us. And, that information can be evolutionarily useful or not. It might be psychologically useful or not.
One of the things that they have been used for thousands of years is to help people have spiritual experiences. And the essence of the spiritual experience is a sense of unity, a sense that we're all connected, a sense that there's one larger system, on the planet, in the universe, and that if you can feel that, then people that are different from you are actually more similar to you than different, that we're all part of the human family. And if you can identify as part of the human family instead of my country, my religion, my race, my gender, my sexual orientation, all these different ways that we subdivide ourselves, that if people could have a deeper connection to life itself, to the planet, to everybody, then that would be the ground at which peace could be made. The UNESCO Charter says that since wars begin in the minds of men, it's in the minds of men that the defenses of peace must be constructed.
So this DMT that's inside of our brains, this natural psychedelic, I was really curious, how do we access it? So I went on a quest. I started exploring different methods. I tried meditating. I did crazy breathing techniques. I went to go train with Wim Hof and learn his breathing techniques. And we jumped in frozen lakes and I went out into the cold. I also participated in Inipi ceremonies, Native American sweat lodges. At one point, I went on a fast for 55 days. I lost over 40 pounds. And at some points during that fast, I would not eat or drink water. So I dry fasted for up to 100 hours straight. And on this quest, I reached many different altered states of consciousness, nowhere near where I had reached with ayahuasca or any of the psychedelics. But there was something there, but it just wasn't exactly the same.
Here's how I would explain the difference between taking a plant medicine or any medicine in order to open yourself up and doing it through breathing and movement. By the way, shamans have been using breathing and movement and dance. Oh, drumming, boom, 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 rattles. They've been using sound and movement in order to alter their states of consciousness so that they could receive information about how to heal others from the very beginning. And that's not to say that plant medicines weren't a part of it, but that is to say that they also understood and took great care to get into the intelligence of the body by opening it up with vibration, movement, and breathing in order to get the information, in order to expand. When you take the medicine and boom, you're waking up to things. Well, shamans have been doing that for generations with just movement, breathing, and vibration, sound. So I was able to experience that first. I was able to experience opening up through movement, breathing, sound in the same way that a shaman would in that way. And I had my experience, I had my evolution, I had all the gifts that were available to me, many of which sound a lot like what people who have used plant medicine experience and describe, which are the visions, which are the downloads of insight, which are the dreams that show up days and weeks afterwards. All of a sudden, it's almost like there is it's interesting that I go here, there's an opening, a third eye opening, and boom, you start seeing things that you couldn't see before. The insights are there. By using bioenergetics, active breathing, active meditation, over the course of 3 years, it had been a process for me where slowly I'm opening up to states of consciousness. Slowly, I'm tippy-toeing into different dimensions. Slowly, I'm receiving the right information for me at the right time for my evolution over the course of years. It's a process. To this point where I got, at this point, I could change my state of consciousness now with just a little bit of drumming, a little bit of yelling, and acting out. And then I could work myself into that type of state. When I experience the plant medicine and when I speak to people who use it, it's like going from walking around to bam, waking up instantly, as opposed to walking around and slowly waking up to yourself. One way I like to describe the difference between the two is active meditation and bioenergetics is like if you can imagine you're in a block of ice. We're all frozen in our block of ice. Active breathing is like the sun slowly melting, and you're starting to move a little bit. You get a little bit more motility. And as you begin to, the ice melts and you begin to open up, and then you become alive. The plant medicine is like you're in that same block of ice and someone takes a sledgehammer and goes bang and cracks you wide open. That's why a lot of people end up going a little crazy because they're not prepared for it. I would say if you're going to use plant medicine, begin with months of meditation first. That way you're familiar with the emotions that are going to arise. A lot of people, when they take that plant medicine, there's fear, there's uncontrollable sobbing, there's all this emotional reaction that they don't know where it's coming from, but it's been trapped in their body. They're just open to it now, and it can be very scary. But if you use active meditation, you get in touch with your body in the way I'm describing now, over the course of a few months first, you will begin to open up slowly and process a lot of the junk that's laying on the surface first, so that when you do take the plant medicine, there will be a greater opportunity for a more enlightening experience.
So when I started doing breath work, I started to notice that we could access certain states of mind and certain states of consciousness that normally wouldn't be able to be achieved by just a natural practice, and that I could achieve them pretty easily and pretty effectively. What I find really interesting about this is that I've been teaching this stuff all over the world, and I've been meeting so many people from so many different practices, and a lot of times they tell me when I do the breath work with them, and it's important, you can't just hyperventilate and dive into this stuff. It's very important to do this in a proper setting, in a safe way, with proper guidance. But whenever I do this with people and they get into this state, a lot of times afterwards they say things to me like, oh, I've been on an ayahuasca journey and I've had a very similar experience. Or somebody says, I've had an LSD experience and this was a very similar thing. Or they said, I have been in a sensory deprivation tank for so many hours and I had a similar experience. A lot of times we refer to this kind of breathing as DMT breathing. And this simply has to do with the shared experiences with people of which they know that they've had DMT in their system. So with ayahuasca, or even like smoking actual DMT, and people would describe these experiences and these would be extremely similar. So the kind of things that people see, the kind of revelations that they have, the kind of connection they feel to the universe or whatever you want to call it, but also the kind of change that they would feel in their daily life afterwards. So during those very deep breathing sessions, people afterwards would say, a long time afterwards would say, it's changed me in a profound way, in a very similar way as to what people say when they use DMT.
Meditation, drumming, ecstatic dance, sensory deprivation tanks, sound healing therapies all have been known or reported to create altered states of consciousness, similar to a DMT or psychedelic experience.
So what did I find out after trying all these different modalities, trying to, access altered states of consciousness? I got to some pretty interesting places, but nowhere close to where I had been on psychedelics. Maybe I need to try them a little bit longer or dedicate myself a little bit more. Sometimes some of these practices might take 10, 20, or 30 years to achieve those states of what they might describe as enlightenment or nirvana. But one thing is for certain is that it seems like we're all climbing up different sides of a pyramid, trying to get to that top, to that state, that altered state. And, maybe the psychedelics is a shortcut. Maybe it's just a faster way to get to that same place. Some guys who have gone the other route said that once they did try psychedelics, it did take them to a similar state that they had achieved through either meditating or breath work. So I think we are going to the same place. We're just taking a different route. So transformation, the effects of psychedelics on people sometimes are so profound that it's almost like nothing short of a miracle. People who have been in such a dark place for so long, whether it's with addiction, depression, anxiety, you name it, and in one night or in just a couple of sessions, their life's changed forever. Some people say they got more in one night of a plant medicine ceremony than they had in 30 years of psychotherapy or with a psychiatrist.
I came to Canada in 2000, so basically didn't speak during the week. It wasn't easy.
So I was growing up with my mom in Toronto, and I would have visitation with my father. I remember probably taking my first drink from him when I was about 7 or 8, around there. It was often times when I was with him where I was in unsafe situations. If I took a sip of his drink, or sometimes he would just give me a little brandy, that it would put me at ease and comfort. My mom worked hard to support us. My dad wasn't there for us financially, and so I was put with a lot of babysitters. I was sexual abuse issues and feeling really, really, really unsafe.
I'd always sort of had a sensitive body, but I was fully functional. I had been working a lot. I worked at Harvard Medical School. One day I woke up and I was in incredible pain. And I would say that the day before that, in a way, was the last day of my life. I couldn't get out of bed because of the pain. I had gone to a series of very top doctors. I was sent to specialist after specialist. And they kept making predictions, and they kept coming out wrong. Someone said to me, "You have to be your own doctor," at one point. And so I started doing my own research, and they took a blood test, and they checked almost every box on the list. And I asked the rheumatologist, "Can we check for scleroderma?" Because luckily, unlike a lot of these other diseases, there's a test for it. And after 6 months, I found my own diagnosis, which is scleroderma, an autoimmune disease, which hardens the connective tissue in your body, which holds your body together. So I slowly turned into a mummy.
About 3 years down the road of hard work and virtually imbalanced lifestyle. It's work, 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 study, study, study. One night, it all exploded. I basically woke up in the morning about 5 a.m. and just like feeling so bizarre and weird, and it's like everything was spinning around. I basically was losing my breath. So later on, I realized there was a severe panic attack. I didn't know what to make of it. It was so overwhelming. And then basically that shifted everything in my life. I lost sleep completely. The anxiety attacks were going one after another, like an avalanche, day after day. Suffering during the day, not sleeping during the night, thinking the craziest thoughts, the thoughts were coming by themselves. Things really started getting weird. My blood pressure dropped like 60 to 80, my pulse went up over 100, always tired and not being able to relax or sleep or anything. Finally, I just realized, I need to go to the doctor. And it's interesting, oddly enough, the doctor looked at me and said, "You're fine. You're just going, like many people are going through stress. It's like, many immigrants do go through that. But everything is fine with you. You just, need to get it together." He didn't offer me anything. He didn't offer me any counseling. He didn't offer me anything at all. It's like I left the office virtually with the same knowledge that I entered the office. I just realized that I no longer can support life. I can no longer be in the family. So I declared to my wife that I'm leaving, that we need to separate because it's taking too much on me. I totally started losing it. Started getting into all sorts of conflicts at work. They let me go. I worked for the bank for 4 years, very good place, went for welfare. And started getting food from Salvation Army. And if you know any notion of what it is to be out of your mind, that was what I was. It's like a mental hospital, People are there, they're walking, but, lights are there, but nobody's home.
I found myself by age 11 sneaking into the bar and pouring a little bit of this and a little bit of that. Then I started with weed, and that got into cocaine. Came back to Toronto and was looking to score cocaine and was introduced to heroin. And that was really, that I would say was my drug of choice. Everything else went by the wayside. Like wasn't interested anymore in alcohol and cocaine. As my addiction progressed, and it was very easy for me to slip into prostitution. I was not high functioning, definitely not. That was my primary relationship. 100% was my relationship with my drug. I could only facilitate that by having relationships that made that possible. School ended, everything ended, and that became my life. It ended up me getting arrested, and I got put on methadone. Being in methadone clinics for like 17, 18 years, I didn't really see anybody getting off of it. It is widely prescribed, and I didn't see anybody getting off of it without going back on some kind of either prescription opiate or street, drug. They were going to do a year-long thing for me, which was like 4 months to 3 months to to build me up to a place that would hold me and then keep me there for 6 months, and then 3 months to take me off of it. It keeps the user in an active form of addiction, because you have to wake up every morning and take it to feel normal. That 1 year turned into many, many, many years. With addiction, you have to be at a point of readiness. And most people are forced into going on methadone because they can't afford their drug anymore, or they're in legal trouble, or they're going to lose their child. So it's not them making a conscious decision that, you know what, I've reached a point of willingness and readiness, and this is a way that I can get to clarity. I've been clean and sober since August 11th, 2005, besides the methadone. I got off street drugs and alcohol.
From what I understand, you get maybe 10 years maximum to live, and it's a very painful way to go. I was in tremendous pain, and I was bedridden. I traveled by stretcher, by ambulance for 3 to 4 years. And I was told that there was no hope. I think at one point I was taking 32 pills a day. I knew I was going to die. I was very close to death for a very long time. And the pain was tremendous. I didn't sleep for maybe 2 years. Even tucking in a sheet was too much weight. So I was sort of like a cadaver, and they would just lay the sheet over me. I contacted a place in the United States with nurses who will sit with you while you euthanize. They won't help you, that's not legal, but they'll be in the room with you while you do it. So I was really looking for a Hail Mary pass at that point.
I started to look actively for help outside the medical establishment. So I started, because I'm a software development, I do a lot of internet, so internet is like home for me. So I started browsing, I started finding people with similar stories. And then I met a lady who became my friend, my girlfriend, Natalie. So she introduced me to cannabis. And that was, to me, the first point that I actually learned that there is hope. Because after I tried it, I fell asleep. After about 4 or 5 years of insomnia, all I needed from my doctor, whom I talked to 5 years previous to that experience, the doctor who's been trained to understand humans, to relieve them from their suffering, did not talk to me about the existence of healing cannabis, which is known to heal stress and insomnia. And then I had to go through all the conflict, to lose my family, to lose everything, my job, in order to meet that lady who is not a doctor at all. He doesn't even have a bachelor education, but she gave me the gift of cannabis, and I fell asleep.
At that point, I thought that I was clean. Like, I thought that my life changed so much. I went to my 13th treatment center. All this time, they're saying they're bringing doctors into all these places to prescribe me my methadone, and I'm saying, well, maybe I should start tapering my methadone. Lisa, are you kidding? Just look where you've come from. Look what you've done. Just think of this as your insulin. Like, you know, this is just your medication. This is prescribed, and this is your medication. And like, just be grateful for where you've come from. You know, you're a miracle. So I met my husband in 12-step rooms. He's a recovering addict, alcoholic as well, and my now husband. And we became really good friends. I met him when I first got out of treatment. We were friends for years, and we ended up getting married. And once we were married, I started like a pretty heavy-duty taper of methadone, and it took me to a place of psychotic breaks. Like, my brain was saying it's been too many years, and my brain, my body, my soul, my spirit was just absolute havoc.
I started listening to some podcasts with a man named Dr. Christopher Ryan. And he was the first clear, intelligent voice that really articulated using psychedelics in another way, in a medicinal way, because I had only ever viewed it in the typical way that our society treats it, where I wasn't very interested in that. So I reached out to Chris, and Chris said, I don't know you very well, so I'm reluctant to suggest this, but If I were in your position, I would probably do ayahuasca. I couldn't get to Peru. I couldn't even get from my bed to my commode, about a foot away from my bed, without help. I managed to acquire ayahuasca. I had spoken with Dr. Gabor Mate, who has had patients with scleroderma before, and he was able to give me some advice to help me stay as safe as possible while I was doing it. But I couldn't move.
I was reaching out to like all different doctors, head of psychiatry here, head of addictions at this hospital, and they were all telling me the same thing. Well, you're on a smaller dose, don't taper anymore. Please just, like Lisa, please covet your recovery, you know, covet how far you've come. And I knew that I couldn't do it. I couldn't wake up every morning and have to take something. And besides that, I was nuts. I was suicidal. So my husband was reaching out to absolutely everybody, and his father's a doctor, his brother's a doctor. They were reaching out, and somebody told them about Gabor Mate. In 1 week, 3 people gave us his book, The Realm of the Hungry Ghost. And I've seen so many doctors, like I've been to so many specialists, and Western medicine just kept giving me the same message. Just stay, just stay. And he doesn't talk about psychedelics in his book at all. But what I heard was a different compassion from him. Like maybe, but I still didn't reach out to him. My husband sent him an email and said, please help my wife, she's gonna die, she's come so far. He happened to be in Toronto a few days later. I met with him, and he listened to my whole story in quite a lot of detail, said very little, and at the end he said, I think I have a way that you can save your own life. So a couple of months later, I went to Mexico, and I did my first ayahuasca ceremony.
With ayahuasca, I realized that I finally found the teacher that I needed in life. The ayahuasca knocked on my heart. A lot of things of the mind just shut down. The mind just was, after that night, was quiet. It became quiet. It stopped rumbling about small things, about whatever it was rumbling before, about, you know, unreasonable things, endless stories, endless scenarios. It eliminated all panic attacks. So I have no panic attacks anymore. I have no anxiety anymore. I don't even know how it's possible for me now to have them. It's not something that somebody takes a book and reads about it with this mind and makes some kind of conclusions, logical conclusions. It's not about that. It's a direct experiential learning.
Oh, what can I say? And that's where the real life-changing began. It's not an escape. Everything I used was to numb and to escape. Any plant medicine, any plant teaching is going to teach you truth and clarity and connection. And it's the exact opposite of what I was seeking for so many years. You can come back from the pain that you've been running from. You can stop running. And this has helped me do it. I have liver disease, I have hepatitis C, and I've never been treated for it. Ayahuasca brought my counts right down to, from very high to in the normal average range of a healthy human being. You know, I also didn't have my menstruation cycle for 20 years. And they said to me, like, you're perimenopausal, like it's not coming back, don't worry about it, kind of a thing. Working with a shaman, and he said to me after a ceremony, he said, Lisa, you have 3 spirits in your womb and you have to release them. And I said, 3 spirits? He said, did you ever have any abortions? And I said, yes, I had 2. And he said, no, I think you had 3. And I'm like, okay, Dave, I had 2. But anyways, he said, I need you over these next few ceremonies to really pray on it and like every day meditate and tell them why you couldn't parent them and why you had to do what you did and the place that you were in when you did it, and try and like let them be at peace and go. He said, I think after they leave, your period could come back. And I was just looking at him. I had just started ayahuasca and started working with the shaman, and I was like, okay. And then I'm just hearing my addiction specialist voice, like, Lisa, just trust, just trust, just trust, just trust. And I'm like, okay. So I worked on this over a 2-week period. I did about 10 ceremonies. I'd done 9 ceremonies. I was leaving the next morning from Mexico on a 7:30 a.m. water taxi. And he came to me and he said, Lisa, we've worked really hard. He said, we need to do 1 more ceremony tonight. I'm gonna have a private ceremony for you. There's still 1 release that has to happen. I was like, I can't do it. I can't, I gotta go back to my life tomorrow and there's absolutely no way. Well, I ended up trusting and doing this last ceremony. And after the ceremony, he said, okay, our work is done. And I was flying home on the plane. And after 20 years of no cycle, I went to the washroom and I had my period. And I've had it ever since. So I came home and I told my mom the story. And I told her the story exactly. And I said, but I only had 2 abortions. She said, no, Lisa, you don't remember at the very end, you had 3. Talk about trust.
I tried it for the first time at the end of 2013. And the first time I drank, I could stand up and walk. And the pain was gone. It was just gone. I threw up a lot. It was very painful. It was very violent, but it was very difficult to do it alone. After 2 years, I was well enough to travel and finally get to a real shaman. And I've been working with him since December, so about 6 months.
I was so used to being numbed. I had no relationship with my body. I had no relationship with my spirit. Like I was just vacant. And ayahuasca showed me who I am, who I was meant to be, reconnected me with myself, my soul, my life force. Like that flame that was always flickering inside of me. As much as I tried to snub it out, and I tried hard, it like brought it to a full burning torch. And the beauty of ayahuasca is after I've had a painful time, it shows me the most incredible light that I didn't even know existed, and light and connection. So I would say that's what it is connection. It's connection with my physical body, my emotional body. Without question, knowing that I'm connected to something bigger, greater. Without any doubt, like I have no doubt now. So maybe it was a rebirth thing because it was, like I know I'm part of something bigger.
Well, any type of healing, including ayahuasca, where, you know, true healing, I'm not talking taking the symptoms away by medication or surgery. True healing, number one, takes time, and it's a transformation. So ayahuasca will go into the root of the illness, and it's always tied in some type of trauma that we hold. It's not actually complicated healing. It's about getting in touch with what's present in your body now, what you hold from decades prior, or years prior, and it's just a matter of letting that go. But we hold it, and we resist it.
My colleagues, my medical colleagues would say, well, that's an anecdotal piece of evidence, it doesn't mean anything. Yes, it's anecdotal. There's no long-term controlled studies of ayahuasca in the treatment of scleroderma. How could there possibly be when it's an illegal substance? But there are other stories like this, plenty of them. And I happen to believe in the power of human experience. And I know, I've seen it with other conditions. I've treated people with severe inflammatory bowel disease who could get off their medications after the ayahuasca experience. I know people with rheumatoid arthritis whose doctors had given up on them, who are off medications. Yes, these are anecdotes, but at least it means that we should be taking them seriously and studying it. In my opinion, and I would also say, according to very well established research evidence, all chronic illnesses, with the exception of very few genetically determined ones, all chronic illnesses, whether it's mental illness like ADHD, which I've been diagnosed with, or addiction, or depression, or psychosis, or the physical illnesses like the autoimmune conditions, cancer, and so on. They're all relatable to early childhood emotional loss and their consequences. And there's more and more evidence about that. And not only early childhood, but even what happens in utero. So it also means that if you can understand the connections, and there's a tremendous literature now showing not the connection, but the unity of mind and body. A recent study out of Virginia just last week turns out that the brain is totally connected to the immune system. The emotions are connected to the immune system. Now, that's not new, but it was big news because people didn't know about it. But again, more proof. Thousands of research articles. So that given that the emotional system and the immune system and the nervous system and the hormonal apparatus form one unit, it would be stupid to suppose that emotional experiences have no impact on our physiology.
So I also noticed through some of the studies I was looking at that at the root of all disease, there's something called inflammation. Some studies were showing that there's inflammation and depression are linked. Some studies are also showing that emotional trauma and inflammation are linked. And there's also a bunch of studies that show that psychedelics have anti-inflammatory properties.
There seems to be a link, but what is it? Does inflammation cause things like anxiety, depression, and maybe physical ailments? Or is it a symptom of them? Could there be an emotional link? For example, could emotional trauma cause inflammation? Then it slowly manifests into emotional, mental, and physical sickness, like anxiety, depression, or even disease? Could it be possible then that psychedelics could potentially heal these emotional wounds and potentially also reduce and reverse inflammation? I feel a lot more research needs to be done in this area.
The influence of psychedelics on modern society is profound, but goes relatively unseen. It is said that Silicon Valley was sort of inspired or founded with a psychedelic influence behind it, in the 60s, 50s. Guys like Steve Jobs said that, taking LSD was a profound experience, one of the most important things in my life. LSD shows you that there's another side to the coin. You can't remember when it wears off, but you know it. It reinforced my sense of what was important. Creating great things instead of making money, putting things back into the stream of history and of human consciousness as much as I could. Other discoveries like DNA and the polymerase chain reaction were attributed to experiences with LSD. And even bands like Jimi Hendrix or the Beatles totally revolutionized their sound, through their experiences with psychedelics.
Hallucinogens seem to play the role of breaking down our perception with reality. That relationship is something that we don't even see because it's a part of the way that we operate. And a lot of the times, our reactions aren't as obvious to us. We feel that they're brought on because of the specific circumstances, when really those specific circumstances in our lives, they just allow for the right conditions for us to express ourselves exactly the way that we are feeling in that moment, or something that might be building up over time. So taking something like mushrooms or San Pedro, ayahuasca, you name it, anything that DMT, breaks down the typical way we see things and opens up new patterns, new ways of seeing. You listen to music on LSD, you're going to notice different things in songs that you've heard hundreds of times. Films, you'll pick up on different things. People's facial quirks that you never notice they make all the time, you'll start noticing. How weird your cat might be. Is it just because I'm on mushrooms? These types of things start to occur to you, so you start questioning a lot of the most deeply held beliefs and concepts that we hold about reality in general. Now, the caveat to all this is doing it responsibly, doing it medicinally, possibly shamanically, has to do with something that serves the greater good. and you'd find a hard time serving the greater good if you don't even understand the patterns that are deeply rooted in you that do not serve you and possibly harm you, the chronic addictions, anything that we do habitually rather than intentionally.
Science has not explained what consciousness is. It can describe certain aspects of it, but explain it cannot do. So maybe the brain is more like a receiver or a transceiver of consciousness. Right now we don't know, and it's an area that needs deep investigation. And you know what? We've got the tools to do it. We've got the psychedelics. There is no more efficient way to put somebody into a deeply altered state of consciousness and to explore what that state of consciousness really means than something like dimethyltryptamine, DMT. You know, it's a very powerful force. And right now, our society is refusing to investigate that. It's refusing to use psychedelics as a modality for investigating the mystery of consciousness. And that's a great mistake. And that comes out of the idiotic and monstrous war on drugs. Gradually, science is looking into new research with psychedelics, looking at their therapeutic potential. But the next big step is to use psychedelics to investigate the mystery of consciousness itself.
The larger picture, I think the role that psychedelics will play in neuroscience and understanding how our brain works, in psychotherapy, understanding more healing technologies, and in developing a global spirituality and helping people be more appreciative of other people who are different and more aware of our commonality, that all of that will be developing. And so I'm very hopeful for the future and think that the incorporation and the mainstreaming of psychedelics into society will play a major role in healing, spirituality, recreation, creativity, and cultural and human survival.
If psychedelics do become, accepted for use in our society, I think that's where you're going to, eventually I think there should be centers where people can go to have these experiences, and they won't look like hospitals, they'll look like spas. You go for a weekend to take psychedelics with mom and the kids, and you have a wonderful weekend, and you come out and you're a more evolved and wiser person.
Yeah, in an ideal world, we would drop this Western arrogance that we know better. We would realize that as much as we've achieved with Western technology and science, we've also lost a lot. And what we've lost are deep wisdoms developed and lived by Aboriginal peoples. And we would drop the idea that there's only one way of looking at things. And we would allow ourselves to explore other modalities, to be justifiably proud of what we know and to be humble about what we don't know.
I think that we live in a culture of PTSD, and we're always trying to soothe our symptoms. I just sort of see that we've just got it all wrong. I was in a white hospital room with sanitized, airplane cabin air for a very long time, and really you need nature. And I think that there's an arrogance in the West of thinking that we humans can do nature better than nature can.
So the story I'd been told ended up being far different from the reality I'd experienced in these last couple of years once I started exploring psychedelics and this whole other world. And, it made me think, were we supposed to, have these experiences, have this relationship with plant medicines and psychedelics? And if we were, what happened? How did we get disconnected? Was it intentional? Were we severed from this relationship on purpose, or did it just happen? And are we then experiencing a deficiency? And I think that the state of the world and a lot of people on a personal level feel all this chaos and disconnection. And, it only makes sense that something like psychedelics can help to heal both the individual and the world if taken in the right context. And people have the opportunity to take it in a place where there is no fear of being caught for legality reasons. And, there are centers opening up now where people can have these experiences. So, there is a promising sort of light at the end of the tunnel. And I feel that the world will be a better place if more people can have these experiences. I don't find it a coincidence that ayahuasca has come out of the jungle and spread across the world, and iboga out of Africa is now spreading across the world. The disconnected world we live in is starving for reconnection. Not only have they been used safely for thousands of years, they really don't fit the illegal status requirements most of them fall under. They have shown immense potential for spiritual growth and have support from the spiritual community as well. They also create an experience that has transformed the lives of many. Is it time to reconsider the role of plant medicines and psychedelics in our society? Is it time to at least allow people to have the freedom to choose for themselves the right to explore their own consciousness? Is it time for truth?
It is not too much to say that in your hands lies the possibility of averting other tragedies like it. We must work untiringly so that our children are obliged to learn the truth, because it is only through knowledge that we can safely protect them. Failing this, the next tragedy may be that of your daughter, or your son, or yours, or yours, or yours.
Thank you guys so much for watching Psyched Out. I really think that, with more awareness around the subject of psychedelics, it'll become more mainstream and a lot more money and research will get to go into it so that we can really find out the full potential that it has, whether it's for health, whether it's for physical health, mental health, creativity, the sky is the limits in my opinion. So thanks for watching, guys. Please share with your friends, help spread the word so we can raise awareness about plant medicines and psychedelics. Peace.